been such a strain, and a lot of it's because the governor is so arrogant.
Brandon Presley knows the law, and he's chosen to break it.
Tate Reeves is the reason we're not giving health care to 230,000 working people and saving our hospital system in the state.
I don't believe that we need to add 300,000 able-bodied Mississippians onto the welfare rolls.
Brandon Presley, Tate Reeves, and the fight for the governor's office. With 8 days until Election Day, neither candidate is mincing words. Hello and welcome to a live special edition of Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. As we broadcast this, we are just 8 days away from Mississippi's general election for governor. Incumbent Republican Tate Reeves is looking for a second term as the most powerful politician in the state. But Democrat and Public Service Commissioner Brandon Presley is ready to disappoint Reeves. This has been a bitter campaign season and an expensive one too, with hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on attack ads on this station and others across the Magnolia State. But tonight we'll hear both men, in their own words, defend those attacks and the policies they each hold dear. Later this hour, Austin Barber and Brandon Jones will join us to analyze these candidate interviews. But first, we'll hear from the governor, Tate Reeves, on what he calls Mississippi's newfound momentum.
Mississippi has momentum right now, and this is Mississippi's time. The elements of success are investing in our people through workforce development and workforce training. The elements of success are real momentum in terms of job creation. We've got the lowest unemployment rate in state history. We have more people working today than at any time in state history. And our economic development efforts have been incredibly positive. Just this week, I announced a $420 million project in Noxubee County, in a community that has about 400 people, 150 new jobs, paying $60,000 to $70,000 a year. That is Mississippi's momentum.
In terms of economy, what specific policies can you cite for making Mississippi more successful?
Well, I will tell you the primary policies that are making Mississippi more successful are the investment in K-12 education, the passage of the third grade reading gate, which is giving us an even better opportunity for Mississippi's kids to do better and better and better in the classroom. It's investing in workforce development and workforce training, and it's also the policies that we enacted during the global pandemic. We proved to the entire world that Mississippians will show up to work, and they will show up because they want to provide for themselves and their families. We have a quality workforce in Mississippi, and it's just getting better every single day.
You've cited such factors as personal income growth, the jobless rate, and the huge growth in state revenue, but almost all other states saw higher increases in personal income growth since 2019. The federal COVID response poured billions into Mississippi and other state economies, and the state revenue began to fall off this year following some income tax cuts in 2022. The tax credit, national economy circumstances, policies, are you taking credit for some of that over your own initiatives?
Well, Mississippi has passed the largest tax cut in state history. In 2016, I spearheaded that effort in the legislature. In 2021, I signed legislation for the largest tax cut in Mississippi history. We've cut taxes over $1 billion, Byron, over the last 5 years. And we believe in that as a good policy, which helps grow our economy because we're allowing Mississippians to keep more of their own money. We believe that you know better how to spend your money than any governmental entity ever will know. And so we've got a strong workforce in Mississippi. We've got a group of people that will show up to work, and people are making record investments in our state. In the 10 years before I became governor, Mississippi averaged about $900 million a year in new capital investment. In 2022, we announced over $6 billion in new projects in 2022 alone. And just this week, we announced another single project in Noxubee County, of all places, of $420 million. I think we're proving not only to ourselves, but to the world that Mississippi is open for business.
Now let's talk about health care. One of your objections to expanding Medicaid is that you want to get more Mississippians working full time, but many Mississippians work for small businesses that don't provide health insurance. If you get more people back to work, how do you make sure that they have adequate access to affordable health care?
Well, there's no doubt that we have to continue to work to ensure that we have both affordability of health care as well as accessibility to health care for every Mississippian. And that's the reason that I've worked with our hospital leaders over the last 4 years to make sure that we do exactly that. And it's the reason that the vast majority of our key hospital leaders stood behind me just in the last couple of months to propose a plan that's going to pump nearly $670 million into Mississippi's hospitals. It's going to be done in such a way where it doesn't cost the taxpayers a penny. And it's actually going to be real money that's going to help change and improve the financials at our hospitals around the state, and it literally, according to experts, is going to keep hospitals open in Mississippi. The other thing I will tell you is I have been opposed to Obamacare expansion in our state because I don't believe that we need to add 300,000 able-bodied Mississippians onto the welfare rolls. What they don't tell you about Obamacare expansion is that of the 300,000 that would go onto the rolls, about 100,000 of those are currently own private insurance. And so the reimbursement rates to the providers for that 100,000 people would actually go down. That's why it's not nearly the financial windfall that the proponents propose that it is. And that's the reason our plan to ensure affordability and accessibility of health care for Mississippians is a far better plan in the long run than anything that my opponent or any of his allies have proposed.
So your plan takes roughly $700 million of Medicaid money. The expanding Medicaid will also take Medicaid money of $1 billion. And you say your plan's a better plan.
My plan is a far better plan because it doesn't add 300,000 able-bodied Mississippians to the welfare rolls. It actually increases the reimbursement rates to the providers, which that is money that goes directly to their bottom line. It's a far better plan financially. It's a far better plan from a policy standpoint. And in the long term, it allows us to have the time to make the kind of decisions that we need to make to ensure that we continue to have affordability and accessibility.
And the roughly $700 million, will it be something available annually, or how is this going to work?
It would be annually. It would. Now we've got to get CMS approval, but our plan is similar to the plan that was tried in state of Florida, the state of Texas, both of which were approved by CMS. We anticipate that occurring. It won't cost taxpayers a dime. It will cost the hospitals to their share. They'll pay their share, and it literally is a way in which for us to increase reimbursement rates to the providers, provide approximately $673 million to Mississippi hospitals, which will help them then provide care to thousands and thousands of Mississippians all across our state.
Your critics say your plan is a little, too late. Mississippi has 74 rural hospitals, 5 have closed since 2005, 24 at risk of closing. What is the smart way to save those hospitals?
So there's no doubt that Mississippi has more rural hospitals than any other state in the nation. But Byron, it's funny that you mentioned what my critics say regarding rural hospitals. What they don't tell you is in that very same report, if you look at the state of Louisiana and the state of Arkansas, 2 states that have expanded Obamacare, they have exactly the same percentage of rural hospitals likely to close than does Mississippi. The reason for that is, and we've studied this for hours and hours and hours, but the reason that Louisiana and Arkansas have the same percentage of rural hospitals likely to close as Mississippi is because Obamacare expansion doesn't work. And in fact, it is Obamacare that was passed in 2010 that is putting the financial strain on these rural hospitals themselves. It's mighty ironic that my opponent literally had a video shot in a hospital at the beginning of this campaign that was closed and shut down exactly because of Obamacare. And so I think our plan is far better. I think the hospital leaders agree. That's the reason they all stood behind me when we announced our plan. And but we'll continue to work as circumstances evolve. But $673 million to the bottom line of hospitals around Mississippi is going to keep them open, and experts agree that that is the case.
Mississippi continues to lead the nation in infant mortality. That's babies who die before their first birthday, and we have one of the nation's worst rates of maternal mortality. If elected for another 4 years, how do you address access to care for women and their babies?
Well, I think we've got to work on education. I think education is a major challenge. because when you talk about many of those numbers, many of that occurred during 2020, 2021, and 2022, when we actually had postpartum Medicaid for all of our moms. We have presumed eligibility for those individuals that find themselves pregnant, and we've got to continue to work on that. We extended postpartum care this year in the legislature, a bill that I signed into law, which will provide for those moms and those babies up to 12 months after pregnancy, and I think that's going to help. But that's certainly something that we've got to continue to work on in our state. And it's going to take all of us. Government alone can't do it. It's going to take education by the providers. It's going to take a desire for education by those expectant moms. And it's all of us working together and pulling in the same direction. And I think we'll be able to do that.
I know when we did this story, we talked to a doctor in the Delta who said that many of her patients say they can't take off work. They have insurance, but they can't take off work to drive to Jackson an hour and a half. How do you address that issue when people say, hey,
well, there's no doubt that we need more physicians in rural areas across the state. That's the reason we passed the Rural Physician Scholarship Program, where we're taking individuals that are coming to the University of Mississippi Medical Center and going through med school and providing them scholarships if they agree to go back and practice in rural areas across the state. That's something that we think is very important and critical, and it's had tremendous success, and we need more successes. We need more of all physicians in rural areas, but we need more OBs in rural areas as well. And we got to continue to work for ways to find that.
Let's turn to the campaign. You've alleged to Brandon Presley of breaking Mississippi campaign finance laws as a public service commissioner over campaign contributions he received from energy producers, including Silicon Ranch. Have you filed a campaign finance violation complaint over these allegations?
Look, the fact of the matter is that there have been 3 public service commissioners in the last 30 years in Mississippi that have gone to prison for exactly what Brandon Presley has done. It's a fact. The law is clear. Brandon Presley knows the law, and he's chosen to break it. Anyway, he is a hypocrite, and I think the voters of Mississippi are seeing that as well.
Well, the way the law reads today does not define such energy producers as public utilities themselves, and all 3 current public service commissioners, including 2 Republicans, have all accepted campaign donations from these energy producers that had dealings with the PSC. Now, would you pursue or sign potential legislation to redefine what public utilities are to include these energy producers?
Well, the law actually does say that if you produce energy, you are an energy producer. What my opponent is trying to say is that because he defined them as something other than an energy producer, they therefore must not be. The law is clear. 3 public service commissioners in the last 30 years have gone to prison for doing exactly what my opponent has done, accepting this money from these green energy producers, these green energy businessmen. They've gone to jail, and they've gone to jail because they've broken the law. Brandon Presley's broken the law. He knows he's broken the law. And that's just a fact.
Just as your campaign attempted to go after Presley with the attack ads of these contributions, his campaign has sought to go after you by connecting you to the welfare and fraud scandal. You have some ties, direct and indirect, to some of the key players, including your former boss, Phil Bryant, and Brett Favre. You fired Brett Pygott as the leader of the state's civil suit. Why should your office control who leads the state investigation on this case?
Well, what I would tell you is, if you look at the details, as I'm sure that you have, Byron, every single one of these allegations regarding misspending on welfare has occurred between 2014 and 2019. You'd have to believe in a time machine to believe that I was involved in those decisions. The fact of the matter is, I became governor in January of 2020. My opponent knows that is true, but here's the reality. My opponent will say anything that the operatives from the Democrat National Committee ask him to say. They are spending millions and millions of dollars in our state spreading lies that the people of Mississippi know better, that Brandon Presley knows better. And the question that you should ask yourself is, why? Why are these liberal billionaires from California, New York, Massachusetts, and D.C. spending millions of dollars in Mississippi? The answer is simple. They're doing it because, not just because they want to change the governor, they're doing it because they want to change Mississippi. And it's imperative that all of us as Mississippians go to the polls in a couple of weeks on November the 7th to say, we're not going to let these liberal billionaires from out of state come in here, tell lies, and then try to enact liberal policies in our state. They don't want Mississippi to be successful. They don't want Mississippi to have the success that we're having right now. And that's the reason they're spending millions of dollars here. It's not charity. Liberal billionaires from California are not investing millions in the Mississippi governor's race for charity. They're not doing it because they like my opponent. They're doing it because they don't like the conservative policies that we've enacted in Mississippi.
They also say that your brother served as an intermediary between Favre and the state auditor's office. What do you say to suggestions that such ties indicate your conflict of interest in this case?
Well, my understanding is that he was involved in trying to get the money repaid to the state. The fact of the matter is we are suing those individuals that received monies that they should not have received. We are leading the effort to actually recoup those monies, and that's a voluntary lawsuit. We didn't have to do that. We are suing these individuals trying to recoup 100% of the money that was spent in Mississippi that should not have been spent, that occurred before I became governor. Look, even the press has said that my opponent's allegations are false, that they're dishonest, that they are half-baked, because they are. Because again, he will say anything to try to take away from his liberal policy ideas and the direction that he wants to take Mississippi.
You are being sued by one of the defendants in the TANF suit. Among the allegations that you've spent $31,000 of state funds for travel for political purposes, and the Daily Journal has now reported that you've used state planes to fly your family to the Gulf Coast for political or even leisure activities. What do you tell the voters about those allegations?
Every single time I've taken the state plane, I've taken it for official business, period.
That's Governor Tate Reeves speaking with us outside the governor's mansion last week. We'll take a break and bring you our one-on-one interview with Brandon Presley when this special edition of Mississippi Insight continues. Political observers around the country give Brandon Presley credit for giving a Republican a run for his money in a deep red state. The Democrat has been mayor of the small town of Nettleton. He's been public service commissioner for Mississippi's Northern District. But does Presley have what it takes to become Mississippi's next governor? We asked him last Friday.
Well, I think that, number one, my background makes me a lot more relatable to the average Mississippian than Tate Reeves' background does. My daddy was murdered the first day I was in the 3rd grade. My mama was a single parent. We struggled growing up when sometimes our electricity would be cut off, our water would be cut off, and sometimes both the electricity and the water were cut off at the same time. I understand the struggles of working people who are out just doing the best they can for their family, for their kids, to pay the bills. And I think that brings me a unique perspective that, quite frankly, Tate Reeves doesn't have.
How do you plan to stimulate economic development in areas that have historically been underfunded and overlooked?
Well, the Mississippi Delta is an area that is a good example that has been overlooked and underinvested in, and the city of Jackson, honestly. I feel like we've got to have direct investment, and there needs to be cooperation between state government and local entities. My background as a mayor really gives me a unique perspective on that, because if we don't build up infrastructure in some of these areas, we're never going to see economic growth. You've got counties in the Mississippi Delta that don't have a 4-lane highway. How in the world do we expect those counties to ever grow and to have economic development if they don't have the infrastructure that's in place? Another part of economic growth to me is the 16,000 jobs that we can create by expanding Medicaid in Mississippi. Not only getting health care to 230,000 working people, but creating 16,000 good healthcare jobs that have great upward mobility and allow people to have a great career.
When you talk about the infrastructure in the state and the cities, how do you plan to get those relationships, to improve those relationships where there's been some strain between state and local government?
Yeah, there's been such a strain, and a lot of it's because the governor is so arrogant when he deals with local officials. I believe in personal relationships. I think that you've got to sit down across the table and be results oriented. Some of the best things I've been able to get done in my public career has been working with Republicans in the state legislature to find that sweet spot in government where we're able to work together, where we're able to find solutions, not worrying about whether it's a Democratic issue or a Republican issue, but really finding the common ground. And I think that's very important to strike that tone and to strike that tenor as governor, that you want to get things done. I don't care about whether it's a Republican idea or a Democratic idea. Let's look at what the results are for the people of Mississippi, or the results are for the problem that we're trying to fix.
Let's talk a little bit about taxes. You have proposed eliminating the state's tax on groceries and cutting car tag fees in half. These taxes contribute significantly to state revenue. How do you plan to compensate the loss of revenue without affecting the central public services?
Yeah, we can cut these taxes now with the revenue that the state has. The truth is, when we're talking about trying to find dollars for tax cuts, there's always money for pet projects like Brett Favre's $5 million volleyball court, or the $77 million total that we have seen either diverted, misappropriated, or plain out stolen in the state's largest public corruption scandal. So the dollars are there in state government. It's a matter of making the priority the people. We have the highest tax on food of any state in the United States of America. In the poorest state and the sickest state, we tax food higher than any other place in this country. That's a shame and a disgrace, and it tells you just how screwed up our tax system is, that we would tax food higher than anywhere else in this country. Our car tags in Mississippi are the 7th highest car tag cost in America, in the poorest state in America. We should take some of the budget revenue that we have now to cut car tag fees in half and to get the sales tax on groceries, putting that money back into the economy, putting that money back in the hands of taxpayers, and giving them a tax break.
The governor wants to eliminate the income tax completely. 9 states have done so, including Florida and Tennessee. Their economies show a solid growth. Why shouldn't Mississippi follow suit?
Look, I am open to any tax cut that's available that's physically responsible. I've been a tax cutter since I was mayor of my hometown. I delivered 2 property tax cuts during my time as mayor. I believe in cutting taxes. I don't want to go from robbing Peter to pay Paul and then have to jack up taxes on people in Mississippi. Tate Reeves' tax scheme was so out of balance that he couldn't even pass it through a vast majority Republican House and Senate. We know that there are taxes we can get off of people right now. That's the sales tax on groceries, cutting car tag fees in half, but I don't want to stop there. I support tax cuts across the board that make sense for the state, that don't cut essential services, that don't put us into a fiscally irresponsible conundrum where you're having to then raise taxes even more. The people of Mississippi want the sales tax off of groceries. They want the car tag fees cut in half.
You've been spending a lot of time in this campaign talking about the minimum wage. The state is right now with the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. What would you like to see the minimum wage be?
Well, you know, I think that $7.25 an hour right now is too low. I would work with the legislature on a figure. The first thing that comes to mind to me is $10. But many Mississippi jobs pay more than $7.25 now, but there are jobs that pay $7.25 that are minimum wage jobs. I'd like to see that work with the legislature to arrive at a figure, and I noticed Governor Reeves yesterday said he was open to the same idea.
Are you concerned that small businesses might have to lay people off if you increase the minimum wage here in Mississippi?
Most small business jobs today pay over $7.25 an hour already in the state.
Let's talk about Medicaid. You promised you'll pass Medicaid expansion. What will this plan look like, and how do you ensure passage here?
Well, I think that there's a majority in the House and Senate of Republicans and Democrats today that would pass Medicaid expansion. Tate Reeves is the reason we're not giving health care to 230,000 working people and saving our hospital system in the state. So they're working majorities right now to get that done. I would take action on the first day to begin that process by filing for the appropriate waivers with the federal government to begin that process, and work with the House and Senate to see what the final product is.
Well, there are some Republican leaders say that we can't afford to expand Medicaid. What do you say to that?
Well, we can't afford not to expand Medicaid. I believe that we have got to take these steps in Mississippi to not only help 230,000 working people get health care and save our hospitals and create 16,000 jobs, but also to bring in $1 billion worth of revenue to Mississippi. We can't afford not to expand Medicaid in the poorest state in America.
Why is your plan to expand Medicaid better than what the governor's plan is to help rural hospitals?
Well, the governor doesn't have a plan to help 230,000 people. The shenanigans that he brought out a little over a month ago does nothing to help 230,000 working people. It does nothing to help our rural hospitals in some of our most critical care areas and our most critical care units in the state. Yes, it may benefit some of the bigger hospitals, but I also would point out that it's a $178 million tax increase on hospitals. And so I believe that the answer First answer to this is to expand Medicaid and to draw down that $1 billion a year that the state would get.
The governor says he wants to get more people working full-time to get access to affordable care instead of being on a tax-funded coverage. Why not go that route?
Well, I think the governor ignores the fact that there are people right now that are working at restaurants. There are people right now working at hotels. There are folks right now that are roofing houses. These are jobs that Tate Reeves thinks he's too good to take. And yet he calls these workers as if they're on welfare when they simply need access to health care. They're working every day, probably putting in more hours a day than he does, just out working. And they need access to health care as they go about it.
You launched a series of campaign attack ads against Governor Reeves, tying him to the TANF scandal. Most of the arguments you've presented against suggest the governor was involved without presenting concrete evidence that the then Lieutenant Governor was involved. What direct evidence do you have that he was involved?
Oh, I think Exhibit A in the case that Tate Reeves is center to the state public corruption scandal is the fact he fired the independent investigator in this case. Once that investigator got too close to Tate Reeves' buddies, once he got too close to Tate Reeves' campaign contributors, he wakes up one day and Tate Reeves fires the independent investigator. That's Exhibit A. Then we know that his brother, Todd Reeves, was text messaging back and forth with Brett Favre, acting almost as a public relations agent during this period. And the governor himself, and John Davis, who's going to spend 34 years in the penitentiary, said that Tate Reeves himself inspired the $1.3 million that went to Tate Reeves' personal trainer. The governor had been the chief cheerleader of corruption in this state for a long, long time.
But the governor argues that he had nothing to do with anything. He has not been charged with anything. So what makes you say that he still has his hands in the cookie jar? So
I think the fact that he fired the independent investigator in the case, he's never answered as to why he did that. Why would you fire someone that is independently investigating the case?
Do you believe voters care enough about what happened with TANF and the welfare scandal that will make a difference in your campaign?
Oh, I believe that voters are mad about it. They know that $77 million was taken from jobs programs, education programs, programs that were designated for the poorest among us, and given for things like a volleyball court that Brett Favre wanted that was $5 million and $1.3 million diverted to the governor's personal trainer. Vehicles were bought, steak dinners were bought. All types of corruption were seen in that $77 million. And yes, I think voters are not only concerned about it, I think they're ticked off.
Speaking of ads, can you address the one directed at you regarding your time with the Public Service Commission? Governor Reeves contends that you knowingly broke the law by accepting money from a utility under your purview.
Well, the governor is full of lies, and his ads are full of lies. And the best evidence of that is the fact that once he was threatened with a lawsuit over that ad, he changed the entire facts of the ads. He knows that it's a lie. He's trying to deflect from his own time as being the chief cheerleader of corruption in the state, and he's just making up lies.
He says 2 people went to jail doing the same thing that you've done, and you've done wrong.
He knows the facts of that case is completely different, and he knows his ads are a lie.
Does the PSC have a right to decide what constitutes a public utility and what does not?
Well, it's clear that the companies involved in his allegations are not public utilities. That's been recognized for well over 20 years. The state law recognizes that, and he is just simply making up this to try to deflect from his own public corruption and the fact that he's been involved in the state's largest public corruption scandal.
The governor has accused you of taking a lot of outside money from national Democrats from California to New York and everywhere else, that this isn't Mississippi. How do you respond to that you're not really doing the work of Mississippians?
Oh, well, I'm from a town of 1,906 people in northeast Mississippi. I'm as Mississippian as you can get. I would point out that the governor is the only candidate in this race still running his campaign funded by those who have been carted off to jail in the state's largest public corruption scandal. He still runs his campaign today on funds that he received from Zach and Nancy New that he promised to return, and he's never returned them. So we're not going to take a lesson on campaign finance ethics from a guy that still runs his campaign on dollars that were taken from people that are carted off to jail.
If you win, describe your first 90 days, and what will your first order of business be?
First order of business will be to expand Medicaid immediately. We've let other states take our money long enough, and I would work on day one to take those steps as soon as my hand comes off the Bible for us to begin the process of expanding Medicaid and file for the appropriate waivers to get that done. Secondly, I would pull the legislature in to a special session within the regular session to pass ethics reform to ensure that the public corruption scandal that we've seen under Tate Reeves never happens again in the state of Mississippi. And we put some teeth in the campaign finance law to make sure we clean up a system that is infected with corruption.
Regardless of who is elected, the winner will likely be working with a Republican supermajority. How will you get your signature legislation done with a supermajority?
Yeah, look, some people have come to me and said, you're going to have a supermajority Republican legislature. Aren't you worried about that? No, I look at that as an opportunity to get things done. I don't want to be a type of governor that comes in and says, my way or the highway. That's the type of governor Tate Reeves is. I want to be a governor that comes in and sits down with the House and Senate and says, how can we work out some good legislation on priorities for the people of the state of Mississippi, and to find those type of sweet spots in government where Republicans and Democrats can come together. Quite frankly, Byron, I will have a better relationship with the legislature than Tate Reeves does today.
That's Brandon Presley. We'll hear from political analyst Austin Barber and Brandon Jones after the break. It's Mississippi Insight on 12 News, your local election headquarters.